Good morning and welcome to the KRUX podcast, the podcast that we do after a KRUX Thursday session to catch up anybody that wasn't able to be in the lounge, and where I get to ask more questions with the speaker and pick their mind a little bit further about the topic that they worked so hard to prepare for us. So a few weeks ago, we had Daniel van Schalkwyk, and his talk was entitled His Journey from Moralism to Freedom. Now, I was very interested in this talk because I know Daniel from a couple of years ago, but a more formal introduction of Daniel is that he's a professional engineer, but he's also an amateur theologian. And I like so much what he says, that he has a sense for pattern recognition, and data scientists tend to have a very sensitivity for patterns. So I like so much how he applies his pattern recognition then to scripture. And then he says, in his 9 to 5, he's electronic engineer, and he's developing biometric algorithms, but he has such a passion for thematic patterns in scripture. So he's also a teacher, he's a preacher and a pastor, along with having his 9 to 5 as an engineer. So really a polymath in these fields. And he's married to Willa, and they have 4 beautiful children. So it's such a privilege to have Daniel on the podcast to talk to us more about his topic. So Daniel, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Lishan. Thank you for having me. It's a real privilege to have both given the talk and speak to you this morning, and especially about the image of God, which is the central doctrine of my talk, which is very close to my heart as well. As I think it's Eugene Peterson that said, preachers have 1 or 2 doctrines and most of their sermons are about those. So the image of God is one of my core doctrines that I mostly preach about. So the talk was for me also a privilege to share my journey with it, and like I titled the talk, my journey from moralism to freedom, and how the image of God helped me on that journey to move to a place of freedom, and a freedom in Christ.
Yeah, I'm super excited to get stuck into this topic with you again. But maybe just as an introduction to yourself, I was surprised to know how long I've actually known you for. Time just passes, and I realized it's been a decade since you and I studied theology together. So that's really, even though we were in the same congregation together, I actually only really got to know you as a peer in the lectures. And that's also where we met JB in our systematic theology module. So I know my reasons for pursuing the degree and why I needed it, but I never actually asked you what made you decide to pursue a qualification in theology, seeing as you were already an established engineer by the time you enroll. And what do you remember most about that time when we were studying theology together?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we were a bunch of professional others doing the course, but it was an interesting journey because my church life, my focus within church was a lot on the apologetic side. So I loved apologetics, but there came a point when I decided not to be an apologist anymore, because it felt like you were just arguing with people all the time. And then I just got involved in our congregation's Bible school, of course, doing Bible school, and then eventually presenting Bible school. And then coupled with that, some of us know, Henny Swart, who was the head of the Bible school at that stage. He approached, I think, all of us to say they want to pioneer this honors course, and it's specifically for people that are in other fields like engineering or accounting, to actually do a honors degree in theology. And I've kind of got an adventurous pioneering spirit as well, so I said, okay, let's go for it. Let's try this out. Let's be one of the first classes to actually do this with at that stage it was called Stellenbosch Theological STI.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's how I decided to do theology. And looking back, I think it was one of the pivotal moments in my Christian life was to study theology. And we did the basic courses, New Testament, Old Testament, systematic theology. And I think there were a few things that really stood out of studying that. But one major one was to learn critical thinking. And some people would call us skeptics, but it was really having the tools to critically think and critically evaluate everything from what you would read every day in the Bible to what you are exposed to every day. And I think that was one of the highlights, was to move to that, to be able to critically evaluate and think through theology, basically. And yeah, in just how much studying theology and that, like Old Testament, New Testament, grew my relationship with God and understanding him and knowing him through the whole honors course. And looking back at, say, we started with New Testament and what the concepts that I understood there about God, and then later coming back 2.5 years later, evaluating that and realizing, how much you've actually grown in your concept of God and yourself and Christianity through the theological studying. So yeah, it was like I said, a pivotal experience in my life.
Yeah, that was such a special time. I'm so grateful that I did it. It's definitely in my Christian life too. It's one of the best decisions I've ever made. I don't even, I felt like my heart was regenerate, but the course made my mind regenerate for the first time. I felt like I understand, I can read, and now I have the skills to be able to work with scripture myself. And such a gift. I would definitely recommend further study to anyone wanting to dabble in theology. So I'm so glad you also had a positive experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, yeah, like you said as well. And of course, the people we met.
Yeah.
I mean, whether it was in the class and even the lecturers. I mean, both of us have got a very good relationship with JB. And it was born out of that course as well. And I mean, we know him, what is it now, more than a decade as well. And people that we've got to know through it having an effect on our lives as well, like JB, which is also great that the course created.
So when I say you are a polymath, I really mean it. I mean, it's from science to data science to theology. And then what I learned from your talk in the lounge was just your affinity for anthropology and archaeology that I had no idea. So where did this love come from? What were you exposed to as a child that made you fall in love with it? And it seems like you're still able to feed this love for ancient cultures in your adult life, even though every day you're sitting there working in data science and engineering. So where did this love begin, and how do you still feed that passion today as an adult?
Well, like I said at the Thursday presentation, as a young boy, I had a passion for Indiana Jones. So my favorite movie as a child was Raiders of the Lost Ark, and you can go and ask my wife. I'm still out to get myself an Indiana Jones hat as well, an authentic one. So that's kind of tongue in cheek where it started. But I think the whole idea of anthropology, but more archaeology, I've got a keen interest in human behavior, but in the past. How does past cultures dictate human behavior, and with that, the discovery of it. So I've always been fascinated by archaeology, about how these archaeologists are digging in the dust, discovering these cultures. And my real love for archaeology was actually kindled when I was in England, in London, after I studied. I can remember there was a TV show called Time Team. It's an archaeology show that the BBC ran. The presenter was Tony Robbins, that plays Baldric in Blackadder, another passion of mine. And it was a show about a 3-day dig, and they had 3 days to dig some site in England and then discover, and then through the whole show discover and explain. And it's everything from the Stone Age right through to World War II. And that fascinated me, just about people putting the pieces together and then figuring out how humans behaved out of the evidence that was there. I had the opportunity, a nephew of mine is an archaeologist in England. It was cool to drive with him, and he would stop the car and there would just be this little lump in the ground, and then he would stop and say, oh, this is like a burrow, and this is Iron Age, and and it fascinated me. So I've always had this fascination with history and how humans behaved in the past, and how does what their behavior in the past, how we can kind of not predict, but look forward to where does history repeat itself, and where are we just like the past, and how then do we actually divert our path not to repeat history. I think that's in the end where I am at now as a 40-year-old, is how do I look to the past so that we don't repeat it, and how do we look to other people's past not to repeat it. And that's probably where anthropology and archaeology is a real passion for me. Yeah.
And that's what I liked about your talk too, is part of our training when we did that degree is the skill to be able to interpret scripture in the context. And I had never thought before, to look at the theme of the Imago Dei in the context of other ancient cultures. And I think your interest in this has so uniquely placed you to be able to look at that context. I'm so grateful that you brought it to us in the lounge. And anybody that missed out really missed out on such a rich talk. So I wonder if it's even possible in this podcast to just take us through maybe a walkthrough of the main ancient cultures and how they thought about the image of God before we return to the more Christian understanding of it.
Yes, through my archaeology, anthropology, like you said, Lishan, is I started to see how the image of God, and let's use it a small g, was always something for ancient cultures. It's always been, and even more modern, is this thing, and I use this phrase, and I'll probably use it a lot now, and I used it a lot in the Thursday talk, is to make visible the invisible. Is that humans have always had this problem with, we worship a God that we can't see. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with worshiping something we can't see? And then it's this whole idea of making visible the invisible, having a representation of that which you worship. And you see it throughout a lot of ancient cultures, but there's kind of like two divisions to this. So the one is that the object, I call it the object, is the God. So you can have it in an inanimate object where you've and this connects again to the idol idea, and us that's been in charismatic circles about idolatry and the idols in your heart. We associate with this is that there's this statue that people worship, and they worship that thing, and that the God is actually the statue, that inanimate thing. But there's a subtle thing in ancient cultures as well, and this also relates then to the Bible. And this is I discovered where in Genesis where God says, "I made man in my image." That word "image" is the word "tselem," and it actually has a religious context, which is the word for an idol, but a very specific idol. And this is the second category that you get in the ancient cultures, is where you have something to represent the invisible. And people don't actually worship that idol. They are worshiping the God, but they are focused on the idol because they want to make visible the invisible, because they struggle with this invisible thing. So a good example is in Egyptian religion. They don't worship those statues, but those statues represent the gods that they actually worship. So that's why I brought in our background is we think that they worship those of statues of Ra and Set, but actually they didn't. The God was invisible. It's just to have something to look at and have a representation of the God, so that this God has a crocodile head, so I can imagine him as having a crocodile head and then worshiping in that way. The interesting part is, so that's for inanimate objects that we know. But actually, it was for humans as well. So you get in ancient cultures, and this I mentioned Thursday, a guy that in Egypt pioneered this was the Pharaoh Akhenaten. And the interesting about him is he introduced monotheism to Egypt, where Egypt was a polytheistic religion, and after him, again, became polytheistic. He was the only pharaoh that introduced monotheism, and the god that they worshipped was called the Aten, which is one disk. They had in his religion, one god, the Aten. But the interesting part is that in his religion, he was the representation of the God. He was the one that made the invisible visible. And that actually is interesting because his name, Akhenaten, means either the glory or the success of Aten. So you can look upon him and his success to actually see the God's success. And the other thing that, and this Pharaoh people know, is his son was Tutankhamun, the famous Pharaoh that was discovered. And his name translated is the image or the symbol of Amun or Aten, because he had a name change between his name ending with Aten or Amun. Because when he came in, he went back to polytheism, and then the chief god was, of course, Amun-Ra. And he changed the Aten at the end to Amun. And then it means the image or the symbol of Amun. So him as Pharaoh then is the image of Amun. And this carries through a lot of ancient cultures. You have it in Babylonian culture, that the king was the representation of the god. To go to the Bible, the Canaanite cultures had the same idea, where humans could represent the god. So there's this thing where there would be this fertility ritual, where before they plant their crops, they would have this public sexual display of fertility, and the king would normally be involved, and a priestess, and they would then represent Baal and Asheroth, and them having this dance, let's call it that, to symbolize the fertility and represent the fertility of the gods. And of course, what happens is in the story, and this is Ahab and Jezebel, this is what they did, these public displays, because Jezebel was the priestess of Asheroth as well. So this thing happened. So what I found is that in the mind of the Jews, this was front and center. They knew all about the image of the gods. That this was something they knew. If it was spoken about the image of God, they knew that it could be inanimate objects representing the God or a person. But again, I said, what the Bible does a lot is what we call contextualization. Another word that I learned from our theological studies is that the Bible will contextualize, will take a idea or theme from the culture around them, use it to explain something biblically, but always there's a subversion to it. There's a godly explanation to it. Paul, like I said, Paul does it with the body metaphor. The body was a Roman cultural contextual thing. Is the Roman society was spoken of as the body of the emperor, just like we are the body of Christ. So I did my New Testament study was on that, on Paul using that. But I think what through the Jews' mind was that in the biblical narrative, it's not an inanimate object, or it's not an individual, but it's humanity. It's every individual within humanity is the image of God, is this representation of the God.
And that's the subversion, is not in
that's the subversion, is not an individual or a king or a ruler, but it's everyone. It's everyone makes visible the invisible. And that was for me a mind-blowing thing to remember is, or to discover is that it's the word is within a religious context, a worship context. So if I'm the image of God, people look at me to know what God is like. And that was like a mind-blowing thing. Now we can get to down that path, but that was the first step for me is I represent God to creation. So if creation wants to know who they're worshiping, that they look to me. And not just me, but my marriage, my church, my family, my community. Everyone is looked at and say, this is the God that I worship. Now, yeah, I know your next question is, but what's the effect of sin here? How does that work? Because we can't just say, okay, if I want to know God, I need to know myself. I'm doing a study on this because there's a lot of church movements that's actually got that thing, is that if I want to know God, I need to know myself. But sin is kind of the problem, right? So that was kind of my next step in this discovery of my walk from moralism to freedom was, how does sin connect to the image? Because we can't do that. We can't say, but I don't represent God. If you're honest about it. So how does this work? And how does it connect to sin and the fall and all of this? And so this was another little like a discovery that I made. I'm learning Hebrew so that I can just get to some of the roots of words, get some details, because there's some details that are locked up in the Hebrew that the English sometimes misses. That, again, learned that from our theological studies. So what I then investigated was kind of the words for sin. Now there's like three words that are associated with one another, and that's in English it's sin, transgression, and iniquity. And excuse me if I look down at my notes, my Hebrew isn't that fresh. So I started the first word that's translated in English as sin is the word chata. And it was interesting for me, and we've all And a lot of us know this, but it means to miss the target or miss the mark or miss the destination. I use the example, it gets used in other phrases in the Bible as well. Like, for instance, I think it's the Benjamite slingers. It said that they would not chata, miss the target, just to show how good they were with the sling. And that was kind of the first word. The second word is the word pesha, which means transgression. And what that simply means is to break the treaty. There's an agreement, there's a treaty, and you've broken the agreement. And that's translated as transgression. And then the last one is iniquity, which is the word avon, which is also an interesting one because it means literally rotten or broken or bent. It's used in the phrase, if a road bends, it says that the road has a avon, a bend in it. Right. It's not straight. It's not as it should be, or rotten. And this was interesting to me as well because the word is used both for internal and external condition of humanity. It's both used as the internal, where humans are rotten in the inside, that the fall has caused us to be avon, bent, broken, rotten. But also then the external is that the conditions that are created from this internal rottenness is rotten. Is that there's in scripture where Isaiah would say, yeah, the kings of, I think it's Babylon, and will live in their iniquity. And it's not the internal, but it's external, that the conditions will be so harsh because of their sin that they. And this was interesting for me because starting with chata, to miss the target. What is that target? What are you aiming for? And a lot of time we go to, and this is the moralist speaking again, but it's missing the target that God sets, his standard, his instructions. It all goes down to obedience again. Yes, there is a thing about obedience to God, but is that primary? Is that the primary meaning? And connected to all this, is obedience about the treaty? Is avon being rotten about this ability to be disobedient? It is there, but is that the primary meaning? And then this long story about, I did my Old Testament study on the law, on the Torah, the instruction that God gave. And my thesis was about how God gave the Torah to actually construct Israel as a nation, as how their society should look. Is if you look at Israel, the law dictates what they should look like. Everything from their sacrifices, their religious practices, right through to how do you treat your neighbor, how do you treat the poor. And that it's this thing about God coming and saying, Israel, this is what you should look like. If the nations around you look at you, this is what. And you can see that the glimpses of the connection with the image of God is starting to form. Because then the last statement that I made was that if the law then dictates what Israel should look like, what should they look like? And then if you go and look at the law, you can actually draw characteristics of God from the law. That you can say that God is like this because the law says this. God looks after the poor and is merciful because the law says it is. And then the connection was made. That the law actually instructs Israel to be the image of God. That he tells them, this is what I look like, and this is how you should look like, and this is how you represent me to the nations. This is how you make visible the invisible. And there was and I think this is what Paul picks up when he says, when the law came in, sin was known. And if sin is to, and I said, for me, my definition of sin is to misrepresent God. So to sin is to misrepresent him. That's for me the primary. So the target is the image. We miss the target by misrepresenting him. Again, Avon, the rottenness inside is the misrepresentation inside, but also the iniquity outside is the misrepresentation of God external. And that was for me the first clue away from moralism, away from just being obedient to the law and the instructions of God, but actually that it's all about me representing God. And that's what sin is. That's what actually my purpose is to represent him. And I think the biblical narrative is about that, about humanity being the representation of God and missing that and misrepresenting God around every corner. And God stepping in and saying, no, this is actually how I am. This is who I really am, not you misrepresenting me, and that's sin.
And what a richer understanding. My unbeliever friends, sometimes I wish I could just sit them down and explain this to them, that it's not about good or bad. And I think even in your proficiency in explaining these terms and being able to preach the deeper meaning, that's already a restoration of the Imago Dei, even in just this understanding that it's such a caricature that God is just looking for the good people and rejecting the bad people. But it's such a childish understanding of sin. And it's sad even in church, what a caricature we make of being good people without actually even knowing. It's pretty much boiled down to whatever's going to make my pastor happy, whatever's going to get me promoted, whatever I will do, whatever gets me into I don't know, small group leader, zone coach, assistant pastor, just tell me what I need to do to be good. And we very, very rarely even think of it in the context of, but am I growing in my reflection of Christ or my reflection of God's character? So I appreciate you so much that you take the time to enrich the silly little 3-letter word for us into all of these different meanings. And I'm really glad we've got this on the recording, because now I'm just going to clip it and be like, yo, stop trying to be good. Just quickly listen to this, what it actually means to reflect the image.
Yes.
But now my question is, even if you do understand the meaning and you have this desire to rightly reflect the image, then how do you resist not just setting up rules? So I always joke with Jonathan, who is a member of KRUX, and Jonathan has this very lovely ability to live in freedom. I don't know how he does it. His revelation is beyond mine, but I'm such a rule and such a principle person. Every time there's a problem at KRUX, I'm like, right, let's have a rule, let's have a procedure, let's quickly sort this out. This is what happens when the procedure is broken. This is what happens when we adhere to the rule. What is the standard deviation on exceptions that we will allow on this rule? How far is too far before the rule is broken? And then Jonathan always stares at me like I've fallen on my head. And so I guess I need a lot more help, because let's say I register now this desire that I want to better reflect the image of God. Help me to not now turn this into a principle. And how do you traverse this in your own life? Because great, now you have the revelation, but how do you traverse now that fine balance between lawlessness and legalism and freedom? And you came to share with us at the talk this revelation that you've had in this, and the way that, how do you live? How do you know when you are living rightly, and is rightly even the best adjective to use for a life in Christ?
So I'm probably going to punt the book again. There's a book that I read. It's probably 3 years ago for the first time. I've read it a few times. It's a book by Sky Yatani, simply called With. So what he's on about is that we as Christians find ourselves in certain, he calls it postures, that we relate to God in a certain way because of, and he puts the root as fear. That we rightfully live in a dangerous world with everything from sickness to scarcity to it's a rough world out there. We can't deny that. But he says what happens is that creates fear in us, and various fears. And he has 4 postures. I won't go through all of them, but related to this image and obedience and making rules. He's one of his postures that he calls is being under God. So it's a very transactional relation with God. So you figure out in your brain is that you want the blessing so that there isn't scarcity, there isn't sickness, there isn't death, this reality. And you posture towards God in this obedience way, setting up rules so that if I do if I adhere to the rule, God will bless me. If I don't, because there are like these kind of clues in the Bible about this, but then we make it this big thing and say, if I do God is pleased with me. If I don't do it, he's not. And actually we go into a fear management because we have fear for what will happen. And it's the same like you explained is, what if this happens or what if this happens? So we set a rule, a law, so that A or B doesn't happen. And we do that. And there are instances where that is correct. I mean, there needs to be certain rules so that certain things don't happen. Of course, it's not that it's thrown out, but we relate to God in that way. And the other, and he goes through his postures that we have. And I mean, through my Christian life, I've identified that he's got 4 of them. I've been in all 4 of them. But then he goes to, and the book title is simply With. And he says there were these characters in the Bible like Enoch and Noah and Abraham. And it all says, and they walked with God. And it seems so simple. I've had people read the book and they're like almost disappointed at the end because is this it? Are you telling me that it's just about being with God? And I want to say it's as simple as that. My posturing towards God, and I don't get it right, but it's always to be with God. Because coming back to the image is, if I want to be an image of someone, I need to get to know that person to reflect them. So the posture is spend time with God, whether it's in private prayer, meditation on that, or even scripture. That's why I love scripture. It's not, and he mentioned this in his book, it's not a set of rules to live by. We've indoctrinated ourselves saying, oh, it's the manual for life. It's the principles to live by. No, primarily scripture is about revealing God, who he is and what he has done. So that I, thinking, meditating, praying through scripture, actually gets to know God, so that I know who am I in comparison to God. And then it's that thing. It's like Paul says, it's a mirror to look at myself and say, okay, this is who I'm supposed to reflect. But actually being in that place where I'm actually not reflecting God very well. And not going over into then self-condemnation, because This is the amazing thing, and this is the gospel. Then, this I think, and to be honest, I think this is where our modern Christianity has lost the power of the gospel. Where it doesn't change people is because in this place, and I'll explain it by this. I think a great explanation of the gospel is in Mark, in the two entries of Jesus, where he enters Jericho, and then chapter after he enters Jerusalem. And I'll take Jerusalem first, and sometimes that's our response. The people in Jerusalem is our response to the gospel, is we take our clothes and palm leaves and we throw it on the ground, and we are in celebration because the Messiah is here, the King is here, he's here to save us. Hosanna, Hosanna, and we shout, blessed is the one that comes in the name of the Lord. But I think that's not the right response. That Mark is actually putting it there to say this is not the response. The response is actually one chapter earlier. And it's for me as Bartimaeus at the gate of Jericho, where again, he realizes, and I don't want to jump down this rabbit hole of him being blind. He doesn't see, but he realizes that the King is here. The King of Kings, the Messiah is here. And he shouts that title, Son of David, which is a kingly title. But he says, Son of David, have mercy on me. He realizes that him in comparison to Christ is not. And he has a problem because he doesn't reflect the King. He doesn't represent the King. But the amazing part of the gospel is then, this is why I like the story as the gospel, is Jesus comes to Bartimaeus, picks him up and says, what can I do for you? And the King is merciful. And I think that's the posture to walk in, is to say, I'm with Jesus. I know what he looks like, or I'm daily learning about him. How do I compare with him? And then going to him and say, Son of David, have mercy on me. I do not reflect you. Help me to reflect you. That's what I want. Is I want to reflect you. Grant me the grace to reflect you more and more every day. And that's my posturing. That's my freedom posture, is that. Son of David, have mercy on me. And the amazing thing about God is he does. And he's gracious. He grants you grace to, little by little, reflect him more and more each day.
I'm going to have to go think about that. You know, this year I've really been struggling with humanity versus machine, especially in this year that we've just seen the rise of AI, and I'm trying to orientate myself in modernity, and I've been struggling with being human and having perfect technique, like I shared at Thanksgiving too. And I've been wondering, so my students, I'm teaching cohorts of 260 students at a time now, and at second year maths, you know, to have such a sea of faces in front of you, and maths is actually, it's not something that you can just impart into such a big number. You really need an intimate relationship to see which foundations are missing. But at 260 in a cohort, it turns into a machine. It really is just like a sausage machine. You have to pull them through. And I've really been thinking about, you know, is it even possible for our structures to go beyond Dunbar's number before it turns into silly rules and principles? And I think an example is you and I both grew up in a tradition where it starts with wisdom, and then the general wisdom gets placed into an actionable principle, and the actionable principle becomes this little set of methods. So I remember one of the silliest things is, you know, it starts with, it is good to be generous, therefore be a cheerful giver. Have you given your tithe yet this month? to the point where now you have to go for deliverance from the curse of the miser, where somebody has to expel some generational curse. And it started with, maybe it's good to be generous, and now it ends with, you have a demon because you're not tithing. And it so quickly turns into that when you're working with these massive numbers. So what I'm aiming at is, I know that you also preach, and I know that you're a tent maker, assistant, minister. And with all of the things that you and I have seen growing up, and the things that we've almost had to lay down, how now do you pastor? What is your approach? How do you stop just the perpetuation of these silly, almost rule-chasing cultures that we often find, especially in how churches grow, and how do you manage a growing body? I need any advice, even just for our KRUX membership growing up, to avoid technique, method, and principle from starting to rule our lives.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head about intimacy. I think we and church eventually. I mean, it's my opinion, but I don't want to pastor a church larger than, I want to say, 50 people, because of that is because of intimacy. And there are probably places for bigger and larger, and how do you structure that? But the key is that intimacy. It's as simple as that. And it's interesting, if you read the Bible, just how you don't realize how spending time with Christ, being intimate with him and the Holy Spirit actually transforms you. And it's not, but it's that intimacy that we need to cultivate in people. And again, it's easy, like you said, it's easy to then even have this as a principle. I know we were in that place where, and again, punting the book. I think it's you mentioned the modern world it's our scientific brains going and saying, okay, we figured out how everything from, well, we think so, how everything from black holes to the atom works, so we can figure out how God works. Mm-hmm. We analyze him, and we try and put principles down, just like I do every day at work. There's principles, I follow the principles, and it works. And that's true. Thanks. But we do the same. And the key is to not, again, it comes down to that root of fear. Everywhere you can go. I looked into the Pharisees. Why were the Pharisees who they were when Jesus arrived? It was all out of fear. It was them sitting in a place where they came back from exile and nothing had changed. Never again, yeah. Never again, but Israel hasn't changed. Yeah. So we'll be the custodians of the holiness of Israel, because if we don't, the fear is we'll go back in exile. But the problem is they haven't got an intimate relationship with God, where he would have told them, listen here, the exile is done. The Messiah is on the way, like he told Daniel. I'm going to solve the problems. I'm going to transform humanity. So don't worry. Don't have fear. And I think that is how I pastor, is to actually get to the root of fear. And there's many. I mean, I do it for myself as well. Is we are such a fear-driven. If it's fear of scarcity, if it's not that, then it's fear of insignificance. And unfortunately, systems prey on fear. But there can't be freedom if there's fear, because then you walk in line, you do the right things. And I think that's how our pastor is to say, and is to get to the root of why what are you fearing? I mean, it's for myself as well. When my wife and I, the year was a rough year, and certain things happened. Not to give details, but in the end, it was fear-driven that we made certain decisions. And I think it's like you said, how do we know that we're doing it right? Yeah. But just by asking that question, it gives you the answer, is that you have the fear that you are not doing the right thing. And that's how I try and pastor is, let's get to the root fear here and give it a name. Fear of losing your job, fear of being insignificant, fear of death, sickness. And if you really go down, it's fear. And you know what? Just to get back to the image of God doesn't fear, because God doesn't fear. Fear isn't a representation of God. Fearlessness is.
Oh, that's very helpful. Yeah. That's very helpful. Makes you think you're going to have to go journal about all your fears. Go face that little voice that we try and drown out with whatever escapism we have.
And the great thing, and this is again just how I'm amazed by God, and just to go on what's my core doctrines. The one is the image of God. The other one is the incarnation. I love the incarnation. And just this idea of God becoming human and experiencing being human. And you can see that God in incarnation in Christ, in the Garden of Gethsemane, going into that fear is coming, is this whole statement of, please let this cup pass me by, because what lies ahead, I'm afraid of this. But then coming into that place of being the image of God, the perfect image of God, and again, not fearing, and then going and said, okay, this needs to be done. I need to go to the cross. It's the will of the Father that I go and die on a cross, but I will be raised on the third day. And his humanity then goes and say, I need to represent God, and God does not fear. And again, it's not to get down on yourself and now like, oh, I'm going to beat myself with a whip on the back because I fear. And this is why my favorite scripture, and I always misquote I just paraphrase it. It's in Hebrews, where it says, we do not have a high priest who cannot associate with our weaknesses, but was tempted like us, yet did not sin. Therefore, because he became human, because he experienced being human, and yes, everything that we experienced, he knows, and not cognitive knowing, but experienced knowledge. Therefore, approach the throne of grace to receive mercy, because we misrepresent, receive the mercy, but also the grace to little by little represent him every day. So we can approach with boldness. Boldness is not, it was interesting for me to read that, is we have this idea that we need to approach the throne with our faces on the ground and crawling, but it's actually walking in with our heads held high and said, I am here to receive. Give me mercy. I require mercy and the grace to represent you. And then I hope that makes sense, that throws all the rules out the door. And this is the freedom that Paul speaks of, because there's no rules. There's nothing, no legalism there, because it's not a set of rules to buy, but it's not lawlessness either, because it's not a free-for-all, because there's still that place where, and I wanted to throw in this phrase in our talk, and this is our approach to, whether it's the modern or the postmodern world, is we get the two words acceptance and tolerance mixed up. So we think that acceptance means tolerance. And God, and this is what we do, is we want to say God is tolerant, but he's not. He's accepting, but he's not tolerant. So he accepts you, but he doesn't tolerate your actions. And walking in that, and that notion, that kind of a paradox, is walking into his presence and, oh God, you accept me, I am welcome, but my misrepresentations you're not going to tolerate. So let's work together. Grant me the mercy and the grace for my actions. And that is the line of freedom. That is not legalism, and that's not lawlessness either. That's the freedom to walk. That God accepts me, but he doesn't tolerate me, my sinfulness.
It's a completely different perspective,
yeah.
It's like a different paradigm where those categories of right and wrong and lawless and moralist almost don't even make sense if it's a completely different dimensional view of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why Paul can say, where sin abounds, grace abounds. Why? Because God knows that, yes, I accept you, but I don't tolerate your actions. But I know that I need to grant you the grace to overcome it. Because the narrative says that humanity misrepresents me around every corner. And then to close off, I don't know how much time we've still got left, because I can go on for hours. It's for me that in Jeremiah where God says that, and this connects to the image where he says, I'm about to act for my name's sake. And I think I'm still busy working on that connection between the image of God and the name of God, and that it is actually the same concept. So God actually saying to Jeremiah, I'm about to act for my image's sake. And then he says, because Israel, you have profaned my name. You have misrepresented me to the nations. But I'm about to act so that the nations will know that I am God. And that word is that they will know who I am. And then is that whole thing that I will take out a heart of stone and a heart of flesh, and I will give you a new spirit, and I'll give you my spirit, and I will write my law in your heart, and I will. So it's us coming to that place and realization that we misrepresent God. We walk into his presence, ask for mercy and grace to represent him more and more each day. And the key there is repentance. I'm starting I'll punt this little group. I'm starting a group. It's called my wife says I mustn't feel pretentious about this, but the group's name is someone bought me a t-shirt, and on the t-shirt it says "Dare to be a Daniel."
Oh, nice.
So I'm starting a group to say "Dare to be a Daniel," and this is kind of the core of it, is coming to God honestly to him, asking him for mercy and grace. And the basis core of Dare to be a Daniel is in, now I can't remember Daniel, but where Daniel prays, and his heart is a repentant heart. And I've stated that if you take Daniel, if there's one character other than Jesus that didn't have a misstep in the Bible, then it's Daniel. But he prays, and the first prayer we hear of him praying is him repenting. And if there's one person that doesn't need to repent, it's him, but because his heart is a repentant heart, coming to God and say, God, no matter what I do, I misrepresent you. Grant me the mercy and the grace to represent you fully. And that's Dare to be a Daniel, is to have a repentant heart, that I have the boldness to come to God, but to ask him for mercy, and to have then the faith that he will grant me the mercy and the grace to represent him fully, as much as I can.
I think you must definitely do that, because we already have 3 Daniels at KRUX. So I think you already have at least your first 2 sign-ups for the shirt, and then everyone else who has the spirit of Daniel, which just also get on board. So definitely, I think KRUX backs that endeavor.
Great.
Can I ask you to put your Indiana Jones hat on just one more time? Because I felt during your talk, you dug up such a jewel for me that I enjoyed it so much, the way you laid out the etymology of the word ark, and if you can use that again as an example of how we just get used to these words, and we see these words so one-dimensionally, but if you dig into scripture a little bit deeper, you actually understand the wealth of meaning that this word is loaded with. So maybe just so I have a record of it, so I can enjoy this jewel over and over again, can you take us through the etymology of the word ark again? And then maybe if you have any other diamonds in your satchel that you found that is a recent aha discovery for you, that you can share with us, just so that people can understand what I mean with digging for jewels in scripture, because I think you're so good at
it. So I'll do the ark one. So just a misconception. See, a lot of us have grown up in church and with children's Bibles, kids' church, all of that, and the concept of the ark is this boat, because it's built like that. They illustrate it as a boat with everyone in there. So then, in my Hebrew studies, of course, starting Hebrew, I start in Genesis, and then coming to the word ark. And the Hebrew word for ark is the word tavah, Tevah. And just studying it, the etymology of it, it's actually a Egyptian word. It's a word that, Hebrew grabbed from its a loan word, like we have in all our languages. We appropriate words because it makes sense. So the interesting thing is that when you then go to the Egyptian meaning, it's simply, it's defined as a box. It's not a boat, it's a box. But then also it can be a coffin as well. And then the interesting part, it's only used twice in the Bible. And it's used for Noah's Ark. And then it's used for the basket that Moses was put in. That's also called a tavah. So here we go now and say, okay, what did the Egyptians believe a tavah is? And this is the interesting part. It was actually also a religious thing. And there's a book. Now I can't remember the author, but the book is Egypt in Israel. And how he draws in, it's actually the interesting part is it's a book to refute the Jewish narrative, because he wants to say that they've drawn from Egyptian culture and Babylonian culture. But I actually just think it doesn't disprove it. It actually proves it. And the idea there is that they would build these tavahs, and it would be the box that they would put the religious statues in, the image of the gods in the tavah. And there's this one festival where these tavahs are drifted down the Nile to where they must go. So this tavah is seen as the protective box for the image of the god. Now take that explanation to the ark. It's God going, and he's pronounced judgment on the earth, and it's going to be chaos, and it's going to be. And what does the ark do? It protects and preserves his image. Because Noah then becomes that righteous remnant. That's another rabbit hole to dive into if you want to. But the ark is a box that preserves the righteous remnant. Now I'm busy studying it. Why is the basket that Moses was in called the tavah? How is Moses the image of God? How is Moses how is that the image of God being preserved in that basket? So I'm studying that now. Another interesting thing is we call it the Ark of the Covenant. I'm still studying this. It's not the same word. It's not, it's called if I'm right with the Hebrew, it's called a Arum. Ark there is used, which is also a box, just by the way. But it's the Hebrew for box. So why is the Ark of Noah a Tavar and the Ark of the Covenant a Arum? And what's the difference between the two? That idea. And how do they relate? So that's kind of another interesting study that I'm busy with.
I love that. I love it. It's so exciting. If we could do our Bible studies like that, set it up like this exploration and this, oh my goodness, I understand, because I did my Old Testament assignment. I did on creation, uncreation, and recreation, of which the flood is obviously one of the biggest examples of uncreation. And then when you brought together the box containing the image, and as God made man in his image, he preserved man in his image, from the first creation to the uncreation to the recreation. And I was in awe of your talk. I was just like, yes, this is life. I love it. It's so exciting. So I think people who become jaded with scripture, if you can just take this angle again, this investigator hat, it gets so much fun again.
And then the application of that is okay. I like to say, let's not just stay in our heads. How does it become practical? Yes. And this is the thing, is that God is invested in his image to preserve his image. So to our previous discussion, this is where you can put your faith in God, that he will change you, grant you the grace, because he is invested in his image, and he will change you to reflect him, to represent him, to be his image. Number one. So that's the practical for me, is, hey, God is invested in me to be his image. And then this is actually before this draws to Christ. Because then Christ becomes the ark. If you understand the ark, you can understand something else about Christ as well, because Christ becomes a tavar. Not just the image, but actually the preserver of the image. I just got the clue, like the life preserver of the image. And then you can go like stuff like, we are in Christ. Like Noah was in the ark and God shut the door. We are in Christ. So you can draw those parallels as well too. And that's the gospel, is that,
and how we are baptized into Christ, as the ark in the water. So, we go into our ark, into the water, and we are resurrected with Christ. It's beautiful. It gets, you can spend hours just thinking about this. The linguistics is just lovely. I'm so glad that you're doing the language studies also. Thank you for doing that for us. So you're going to be my shortcut. I'm going to be like, Daniel, help me with this word. So thank you for your time for that. Yeah. And thank you for preparing your talk. It was lovely. Thank you for your time. If anybody wanted to come visit the church that you attend, where could they find more? Where can they find out more about when you are preaching or where you're attending? What's a good church that people can visit?
I'm currently, my family's at Shofar Christian Church in Durbanville, because we live close by. So we attend there. I do, like I said, I'm a freelance preacher as well. I do preach now and then. To punt my sermon, I did preach on Sunday evening. You'll find me there. And if anyone wants to reach out and have a coffee, and chat either on this topic or any other topic, you got questions, you got comments, you would like to engage, reach out. They can reach out either to you, get a hold of me through KRUX. They're more than welcome to do that, and we can have a coffee and chat as well. yeah.
Yeah, and as usual, for anybody, if you've stumbled upon this recording, you have no idea what KRUX is. We're a community based in Stellenbosch in the Winelands. We are a group of thinkers and feelers and painters and artists and scientists trying to figure out what it means to live our vocations as Christians, get together semi-regularly to discuss whatever's on our hearts. So you can find out more about the community at crux.africa is our website. You can email me at lishan@crux.africa. And yeah, Daniel, yours was now the last lecture for 2023. So thank you so much. And I hope we see you in the lounge again next year.
It's a pleasure, Lishan, and you'll definitely see me there. It was for me a great privilege to have a platform to share my thoughts and my beliefs to a wider audience, and it's a privilege to have that opportunity, and that you guys trust me. That's the other thing that is great is that that you trust me, that I'm not gonna lead people astray. So thank you very much for the opportunity.
No, you're a good friend of KRUX, and you must have a good Christmas, and then we'll see each other again next year.
See you next year. Great. Thank you.